Now we can start the question and answers and discussion. Thank you very much.
I think the first question is from Dr. Asha Murthy. How do you measure the TAPSE step by step? This probably may go to the Dr. Arup.
Yeah.
Probably Dr. Arup can answer. How do you measure the TAPSE step by step? There's a question from Dr. Asha Murthy.
I lost the screen.
Yeah, so for TAPSE in transesophageal echocardiography, usually do the M mode TAPSE, that is most commonly practiced. So best view is deep transgastric view, and once we go to deep transgastric view, we align the cursor to the lateral tricuspid annulus and put M mode on it. Once we get satisfactory curves, waveforms, then we take 3 best waveforms and measure it, and we have to average at the end of whatever measurements we have taken, and we get the average value. So best view.
Email address.
So best view will be deep transgastric view, or can be done in transgastric RV basal view.
If you are unable to get in the transgastric, if you are unable to get transgastric images, is it possible to measure in the mid-esophageal views?
Yeah, so that's a modified TAPSE you can do. So in the mid-esophageal 4 chamber, but many studies, I mean, there are conflicting reports about the modified TAPSE, and some studies say it's valid, but some studies say it does not correlate with the actual M mode TAPSE. But I don't practice the modified TAPSE in 4 chamber. So if I don't get the TAPSE, I take other measurements of the RV to quantify the RV function. And in my practice, I particularly stress on looking at 2D, the 3 wall motions, like this bellow-like movement inside, the longitudinal movement and the septum and the RVOT, how much they are contributing. It's very important to see in 2D. Then obviously you have not developed any eyeballing like we can do in LV, eyeballing ejection fractions. In RV, it's not possible. But once you do see all these things, probably experience comes to comment on the RV function, and then obviously you can do other parameters. On 2D,
you can try the anatomical M mode in the mid-esophageal views. Anatomical M mode is available with the GE machines. Otherwise, you have to go by the 2D echocardiographic assessment of the TAPSE, which has got a lower frame rate, as mentioned by the speaker, compared to the M mode. M mode will give higher frame rate. So that is one of the limitations of mid-esophageal assessment of TAPSE.
And we can do it.
Shall we move on to the next question?
It can be done by speckle tracking.
Yeah. Sir, I have a question to Dr. Vaishali, wherein in case of tetralogy of Fallot, aberrant LAD crossing over the RVOT, and we can't do a transannular patch. In those conditions wherein we do a double barrel technique, going out to the RVOT and putting additional patch, what would be the ideal view to know the gradient across the RVOT?
I think...
Hello.
Sir, I do not...
I think, sir, shall we
either Srinivas sir or somebody who...
I'm sorry.
Sir, please put the question in the box. I request you to put the question in the box. Probably we'll address them. So I think I'll go to the next question.
Srinivas, Dr. Srinivas, Dr. Hiremat has asked a question. Can you please address that first?
Yeah.
He's in the panel, no? So we have to.
Okay, sir.
Take into account that factor.
Yeah.
Can you please answer that question? Somebody from the team.
Mayor, can somebody repeat, sir? Will you repeat the question, please?
The question is, whenever in a case of tetralogy of Fallot, when an aberrant LAD crosses the RVOT, that time we can't put a transannular patch. So that time we do a RVOT coring and additional conduit, what we call it as a double barrel technique. How do we assess the gradient across both the conduit and the RVOT, in which view ideally would be assessed? Most of the times we find it difficult to assess in both the situations.
See, I think this is a bit off the topic, but still using my personal experience, what we practice here is usually we put a homograph from the RV to PA, and it is not seen in the normal standard views. It is usually seen in the off-axis views. So this usually is modified from the RV inflow-outflow view. If you go further, something around 90 to 100, and if you turn the probe to the right, usually the probe will be put on the right side. If you turn the probe to right, then you can see the this particular conduit, and you can measure the gradient across these, especially when they close the sternum. At that time, there may be increase in the gradient across this conduit. So we can assess the pressure gradient across the conduit once the sternum is closed. So that is off-axis view usually won't get in the standard views.
Thank you, sir.
May I give a comment on this?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. In case in certain situations when you are looking at the gradients on the thing which is quite anterior, so instead of transesophageal echo, you can do the epiaortic echo and exactly measure the gradient across the conduit.
Yeah. Epicardial echo is frequently used to assess this one. You can have both the techniques, TE as well as the epicardial echo.
Can I ask one question here? Yes, after Hema. After Hema.
Yeah,
Yes.
so we do use the double barrel technique with a Dacron tube in tetralogy when there is a coronary crossing. Of course, like Dr. Srinivas said, you're not going to get those axes aligned with your Doppler beam. So by just measuring the TE gradient, you're really not going to get many answers. Moreover, there are two outflow tracts here. The native outflow tract where you may have widened the pulmonary valve and the annulus, plus the flow through the graft conduit. So best thing in that case is just to put in a needle and measure it, not to undermine the value of echo, but you will definitely get more information by putting in a needle and doing the RV-LV pressure ratio.
Right.
The needle technique works quite well.
Thank you, sir.
Actually, my question was related to needle technique. Is there any difference between the needle technique gradients and the echo gradients? Are they similar, or there is any disparity between these?
Because the echo gradient is using the mathematical formula, velocity will increase when there is turbulence. So because of the turbulence and because of the lack of laminar flow, you're going to get an increased velocity, and you might actually falsely get a higher gradient. But that is not going to happen with the needle technique. So for sure, you get a very, much more accurate gradient with the needle technique. So when the flow is not laminar, when there are two different outflows, when there is muscle protruding into the outflow tract, it would be advisable to go with a direct needle technique rather than to rely on the velocity, which may be falsely high because of a non-laminar flow.
Thank you. Thank you, Hema, for that.
Shall we go to the next question from Dr. Risha? She has asked, there are two color flow maps, velocity map and a variance map. Is there practical utilization in terms of echo examination? I think probably Dr. Vaishali can answer this question. Dr. Vaishali, would you like to answer this question? Or sorry, I think maybe Dr. Susmit also can answer.
I didn't get the question, sir. There are two.
Please repeat the question.
Yeah, the question is put by Dr. Risha Malik. That can you please explain the difference between the two color flow maps, the velocity map and the variance map, and a practical utilization in terms of echo examination? So basically, what's the difference between the utility of the velocity map and the variance color map? That's the question.
May I give a small comment on this, because this is quite a tough question, and I think it's related to quite basics. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me give my thought. See, what we are seeing, the color flow, there's a blue and red, but and that depends on the inquest limit and the velocity range also. But it's not a flat; it's a circle. After blue, it again becomes red. That's where the Nyquist limit comes into action. So the compare map is, if you are looking towards the probe, you increase the red side color, and if you are going away from the probe, you increase the blue side color map by changing the velocity map. So it depends basically on what structure you're looking. Is the what flow you're looking. If the flow is going away, you increase the blue one. If the flow is towards the probe, you increase the red one. So this is how you take advantage of both the things. And finally, because it's a circle, it's not a straight thing. What we see on the 2D is a straight thing, but it's in a circular motion that the color flow is changing.
What about the variance map?
Personally speaking, I cannot comment on this because giving false information is bad.
No, basically variance map is used for the diagnosis of stenotic or regurgitant lesions, where we have either very high flow acceleration because of stenosis, or because of regurgitation there is a turbulence. While the color maps are usually used for seeing the direction, as Dr. Arya has mentioned. Probably we can see this red which is towards and blue away, or you can adjust to see the aliasing to see exactly the what is the aliasing limit. That is the use of the velocity map, whereas the variance map is used for the diagnosis of stenotic and regurgitant lesions.
Yes.
Can I ask a question to Aruprata?
Yeah, please.
Yes, please.
So this is about the assessment of RV function with with regards to a pulmonary hypertension patient. You do a lot of transplants, so for or in cases where you have addressed the pulmonary arterial hypertension, how soon do you see an improvement in RV function in your experience?
In which cases you mean?
I mean, obviously in a RV dysfunction because of amyloid or myocarditis, it's not going to improve. But if you have improved the RV afterload, acutely improved the RV afterload with your cardiac surgery, how soon do you see the improvement in RV function? Do you see it right there with the post when you come off, when you wean off the bed?
So I can talk about the transplants, particularly lung transplants and heart transplant. In lung transplant with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis or the pulmonary hypertension, the RV obviously is quite bad preoperatively. And what happens when the recipient gets a new lung and the PVR is so low that heart starts pumping like anything. So what happens, initially first few minutes, the heart pumps so much and the lung gets flooded. And again, what happens, again, initially increasing the RV function, in better RV function, then the lungs get flooded, PVR increases, and again, the heart function gets depressed. That's why, I mean, our practice is not to, used to cause some degree of RV dysfunction in case of lung transplant after in cases of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis or pulmonary hypertension. Whereas in heart transplant, if the heart is bad and you have put a new heart, obviously after heart transplant, we see some degree of right heart dysfunction, and initially it gets bad, but over I think in 24 to 48 hours, we have seen that it gets much better. And in case of pulmonary hypertension, you know, I mean, if the pulmonary hypertension, like in tetralogy fallout or anything, in pediatric cases, once that is released, once you release the correct the TOF, then right heart function. I mean, it essentially the pulmonary hypertension is not associated with RV function grossly. With a severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, right heart can function well, but the other thing can happen. The right heart function can be really bad with a high pulmonary arterial hypertension. So there is a close correlation and again no correlation. So it depends upon situation to situation.
Thank you.
Can we take one more question? The next question is by I think it's not mentioned, but it's mentioned, if encountered resistance during the probe insertion, what to do? Any guidelines are there, Doctor? I think this may be for Dr. Barge, Vaishali, she can answer.
I have not come across any guideline, but if you have difficulty in putting the probe, I think I do under visualization. I put laryngoscope, put the jelly in, instill the jelly and put the probe. So you never encounter any hurdle while going in. And I never put the finger or a thumb inside and do. So it is always better to do under visualization so that you don't come across any difficulty while putting the probe in.
See, sometimes you can deflate the cuff of the endotracheal tube to push it a bit more, but never struggle to push it. If it is not going, I think don't just leave it alone. Don't cause any damage to the esophagus.
There are some, we follow some more other methods. One is the reverse Selix maneuver. So if the patient does not have any carotid lesion, we can lift the larynx directly. It's called reverse Selix maneuver. We can lift the larynx, and most of the times the probe can be advanced with this technique. In case we are unable to do it, then as Dr. Vaishali mentioned, laryngoscope is the best way, or even video laryngoscopy can be tried as a last measure. But usually we do rarely have to use a video laryngoscope. Sometimes rarely we have to use a laryngoscope, Macintosh laryngoscope to advance the TE probe. But the reverse Selix maneuver most of the time solves the problem.
There is one other thing that we've experienced. Because we sometimes put the probe in with the roll under the shoulder, the esophagus takes a little bit of a bump where it is. Yeah. So to negate that, you can always just flex the neck. Just flex the neck and then it slips in. So that is something we have done on occasions.
If you don't know about the patient's history of the esophagus, you can sometimes get an endoscopist to come and take a look also, depending upon urgency and how elective the procedure is.
Then there is one more question on from one of the panelists. What about the eccentricity index in RV assessment? Did I miss it? I think it's from Priya, Dr. Priya.
Yeah.
Who can answer that?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was there in my slide. Eccentricity index is basically we go to short axis view, transgastric short axis view, and with any two perpendicular axis, we measure the diameter. And basically it tells it about the RV volume overload or RV pressure overload. So ideally, in normal situation, the diameter, the ratio is always 1. But in case of RV volume overload, in end diastole, it will be more than 1. Eccentricity index will be more than 1. And in case of pressure overload, the eccentricity index will be 1 at end systole and early diastole. So that basically gives us idea about the pressure overload and volume overload of the RV.
Is it routinely used in the practice,
No.
the RV eccentricity index? Usually it's described for the LV. RV is very rarely, probably it's not described in any of the guidelines, the European or the American guidelines.
No, you're right, yeah. It's not prescribed and we don't practice it routinely. But I mean, this is one of the methods to assess this. And that's it.
Yeah. Then one more question from Dr. Richa Malik. How can we differentiate between the intraoperative myocardial ischemia and myocardial stunning by the use of echocardiography? Can anyone answer, or probably LV function, Dr. Narula? Are you there, Dr. Dr. Jitin Narula? Can you answer this? The question is, how can you differentiate between the intraoperative myocardial ischemia and myocardial stunning by the use of echocardiography?
I think strain imaging and speckle tracking echocardiography can help us in achieving that. Since it is ischemia, it would be, as I had pointed in my presentation, that it would be affecting the longitudinal fibers, and we would have an early deterioration of the strain values. Depending upon the area of the blockage and the artery of blockage, we can determine which area is affected using the strain imaging. And to differentiate it with infarction,
Stunning,
stunning, myocardial
ischemia and stunning.
Stunning, yeah.
So stunning would be when it is prolonged for a long period, or I think. But yes, strain imaging can definitely help us to identify the segment of ischemia and the culprit vessel as well. That is one.
So I have just one thing to ask. Has he asked in the intraoperative setting or any setting, preoperative setting, this question?
Yeah, it's mentioned intraoperative. So basically, if you are coming across a patient with CABG or any other patient who had myocardial ischemia or ischemic heart disease, so it may be intraoperative.
So intraoperatively, if this patient is not on any inotropes, then probably we can start some inotropes, and inotropes will definitely improve the myocardial stunning, where it will not improve the ischemia. I mean, if the ischemia can actually get worsened with the inotropes, but stunning will definitely be improved here.
Dobutamine would help. Dobutamine, what we do in dobutamine stress echo, it is just the same principle, that it will improve the stunning phenomenon.
So basically, what happens? I mean, if the intraoperatively, if there is any RWMA, whether it is something new, and clinically definitely has to be correlated. I mean, just echocardiography will not give you gross idea. I mean, just total idea about anything. If there is any ECG changes, PA pressure changes, if there is new RWMA, obviously we'll suspect ischemia. And if the RWMA was present before or without any ECG changes, patient is hemodynamically stable, we can give any inotrope. Preoperatively, dobutamine is used in low doses, but we can use any inotrope like adrenaline, whichever you use, dobutamine, whichever.
Can I add a point here? It also depends upon whether it is pre-grafting or post-grafting. If it is pre-grafting, it's most likely to be ischemia. If it is post-grafting, it is sometimes difficult to say whether it is ischemia or some graft problem, or it's stunning. So stunning occurs when the blood flow is restored, but the contractile function is not come back. That is stunning. So if the surgeon is confident that his graft is he is happy with the graft, it is most likely to be stunning. That is my answer to this, because it's very difficult to differentiate stunning and ischemia. And stunning will take up to 24 hours for it to recover. So just by regional wall motion abnormality, you will not be able to tell you whether it is stunning or it's ischemia. And you should have a flow meters which measure the blood flow across the grafts, which will tell us whether the blood is actually flowing, and hence it is most likely to be stunning rather than ischemia.
We have got the answer. We have got the answer of our query about the variance map, and the answer is given by Dr. Kumar, who's a new chief editor of IACTA Eco Library, and he says the variance map are used for turbulent flows, which means the yellow is towards the transducer and green is away from the transducer. So if you are calculating the turbulent flows, you should use variance map for the color Doppler.
Yeah. The next question is from Dr. Muthukumar Rajgopal. Which TDI, lateral or septal, is more accurate for LV systolic function assessment? Probably Dr. Narula can answer. Which tissue Doppler imaging, lateral or septal, is more accurate for LV systolic function assessment?
Both lateral and septal have been studied in echocardiography imaging using TDI, and depending upon whether there is any annular calcification or any prosthesis, depends, you need to whether use lateral or septal imaging for TDI. But I'm not sure about this. I think Dr. Srinivas.
I think it's lateral.
Lateral.
Yeah, usually it's measured in the lateral. But as you mentioned correctly, in case of annular calcification, it may not be very reliable, or in case of the pericardial thickening, because of any reason calcification, it's medial one. But usually both have been described for the assessment of diastolic dysfunction, lateral as well as the septal. One more question is about how does the RV dysfunction reflect on LV function measurement on TT and TE? Question from Dr. Abhijit Chitole. How does the RV dysfunction reflect on LV function measurement on TT and TE? Any panelists also may answer?
Yeah, so basically, if the RV, the RV, the septum of the heart, is shared by both RV and LV. So the septum is for RV and both for LV. And septal contribution for the cardiac output, RV cardiac output, is about 20 to 40%. So significant one, not for the LV though. But if the RV is grossly dilated and the septum is bulged towards the LV, then obviously the LV area will be reduced. In that case, LV area will be reduced. In that case, whatever parameters we take, like ejection fraction, FAC of the LV, that will be affected. So yeah, so all the two ventricles have interdependent relationship. So pressure overload and volume overload can significantly affect each other's performance.
No, I'm writing. Just tell me, please. Dr. Mahala, tell me.
Yeah.
I'm already
so yeah, I think Arup, you have answered the question. One more question is from Dr. Vaikar, which is the best method to assess the view to interrogate the IVC, specifically to see IVC cannula during CPB, and where to do it? I think Dr. Vaishali can answer.
Thank you, Vaikar sir. You can get IVC from mid-esophageal bicable view. You go further in, you can see IVC. But during CPB, you can't see anything. It has to be seen before going on CPB. Hello?
On CPB, is there any method? He's asking for on CPB method.
No, on CPB, I'm not aware. We can't see anything on CPB.
I think we can see the IVC flow. If you go a little deeper down,
from the
bicable, if you reduce the sector angle, you can see the IVC flow. And many times our surgeons will insert additional cannula or guide wire through the IVC. So that can be seen if you advance the probe a little lower down and reduce the sector angle, where you can see the IVC on the 2D echo.
I think this is little harsh to say that we cannot see the IVC intrahepatic part. We can definitely see in one of the indications of putting the TE probe is to check whether your IVC cannula is not blocking any of the hepatic veins.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, one has to see the IVC on pump as well, and one has to see that the hepatic veins are draining properly into the IVC on pump as well.
Yes, right. I agree.
See, during CPB, all chambers have collapsed, so it is difficult to see. So we can see before going on CPB and then a little early. But when it is collapsed, it is difficult. That's what I feel.
No. Vaishali, we can see the hepatic veins clearly even on CPB full flows because they are full of flows. They are draining into the cannula.
So yes, the thing is that if your cannula is draining quite well, then IVC may be collapsed. But sometimes the surgeon wants to know whether it has been misplaced into hepatic vein. In that case, if the cannula is deep into the hepatic vein, then IVC will be patent. In that case, you can see cannula is going into the pulmonary hepatic vein, and you can see the patent IVC. But with a full flow, obviously, it sometimes, most of the times, it may be difficult to visualize, but you can see here.
Dr. Arup, one question for you.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate the RV dysfunction in cardiac tamponade?
Yes.
Dysfunction in cardiac tamponade.
Okay. So cardiac, if this is cardiac tamponade, I think it's not pericardial effusion, it's tamponade. Then obviously we don't get much time to have a look at the cardiac function. But what in these cases, what I stress most is the 2D finding. So I will see how much RV is being compressed by the clot or the effusion, and how much contractility of the free wall longitudinal portion of the RV has been affected. And if I want to quantify, probably FAC will be a good parameter for that. So if I want to quantify the RV function during tamponade, then probably I'll go by FAC. That will be preserved, and obviously 2D features will be most important in these cases. But as you have already told, this is tamponade, so I don't need to diagnose tamponade again. I mean, how to do by echo. So yes, that's the answer for.
No, what about the RV diastolic collapse and the RA systolic collapse? These are the important features, especially the RV collapsing diastole. Initially, the collapse will occur at the end of the expiration, but once the tamponade becomes severe, the probably collapse will occur both in expiration, inspiration, and the diastolic collapse of the RV may be, and the systolic collapse of the RA. Both will be important features for.
So RV diastolic collapse is very severe, and RV systolic collapse is very severe. I mean, for the tamponade, but whatever, if this is a tamponade, that will be diagnosed by transtricuspid E-velocity variation and IVC dilatation.
Then Dr. Kanchan, can you focus some more questions? Are there any questions? I think we have covered most of the questions that are there in the box, because a lot of things are written there. I'm unable to see the questions clearly.
Dr. Srinivas, we are more than 2,000 people, so you can guess the amount of questions coming from the
the box is getting full continuously.
Yes.
One more question, artifact. Dr. Vivek can answer. How to? This is from Dr. Benson Abraham. How to overcome the artifact during the TE of proximal aorta while looking for proximal aorta plaques? The question is how to overcome the artifacts during TE of proximal aorta while looking for proximal aortic plaques.
So proximal aortic plaques will actually always be in the line of the aortic wall. They will not be separate from the wall. They may have some, the plaque generally will be more hyperechoic. There may be some indenting into the aortic lumen, but they will be a part of the aortic wall. And they will move with the wall and they will throw a shadow below the wall. While if there is an artifact in that place, it will not be a part of the wall. It will be probably parallel to the wall and it will move in sync with the part of which it is a shadow of. And second is when you put a color flow jet, you will not find color going across the plaque, because if it's an intact vessel, the color will never go. But at the site of the plaque, there may be some local turbulence if it's a prominent plaque. If it is anything else, you will find the color. If it's an artifact, you'll find the color going through and through.
There is a question from Vamshi Kumar regarding which view are used to see retrograde cardioplegic cannula?
So retrograde cardioplegic cannula we can see in the coronary sinus view from the mediastinal fourth chamber view. If you just go slightly down, you'll get the coronary sinus in transverse view. So what I do, if I get that view, I usually put a explain across this, and you can have a both cross section of that and a longitudinal view. And alternatively, if you don't get that view, you can use the modified bicaval view, where in position of IVC, these coronary sinus appears. So coronary sinus appears at the place of the IVC, and you can have a good look of the cannula.
Dr. Narendra Menon has asked one question: how to differentiate pseudo MR after valve replacement? Probably Dr. Vivek or any.
I will take it. So pseudo MR, the first thing is when you look at the prosthetic valve, the jet will not be originating from the valve. There will be a clear gap. There'll be a clear gap between the valve and the jet. And when you look at the jet, and when you look at the LVOT jet, they will appear to be identical. But on the pseudo MR jet, if you place the pulse wave Doppler or probably even the continuous Doppler, and when you place the same thing on the LVOT, you will find that both the Doppler velocities and the shapes are identical. So I think that is a very clear way of differentiating that it is a mirror image and it is not the true jet.
Any other comments, or I'll go to next question. Dr. Sarvana Babu has asked, does the right atrial kick have any role in the RV diastolic dysfunction?
So
does the right atrial kick have any role in the RV diastolic dysfunction?
Interesting question. So if you look at the parameters which we see to assess the right ventricular diastolic dysfunction, so it's all about EYA, E/A and deceleration time, IVCT, IVRT, and this hepatic vein PWD. Obviously, if the right atrial click is absent, that means patient is in atrial fibrillation. In that case, the measurement will be different. So you have to take at least 5 to 7 cycles, and you have to take a velocity of the E and A wave. I think that is the change it can happen. But in presence of atrial fibrillation, it's difficult to comment on RV diastolic function. Personally, I have not gone through any publications of paper with RV diastolic dysfunction with atrial fibrillation, but I think in that situation, hepatic vein pulse wave Doppler will be a better tool to assess the RV diastolic function. Because see, I mean, if this is a mild RV diastolic dysfunction, doesn't really matter. So we need to see whether this is a systolic, whether the severe RV diastolic dysfunction present. So what you can do, you can put a pulse wave Doppler in the hepatic vein. You can, whatever pressing you get ASD wave, you have to do the systolic fraction, filling fraction. And then
no, Dr. Arup, the question is whether the kick will, right atrial kick will contribute to the RV function, or in the RV diastolic dysfunction, whether the right atrial kick, like on the left side, the left atrial kick is very important for up to 20 to 40% filling of the LV. Similar to that on the right side, is there any role of the right atrial kick? That's the question.
I don't think so. I mean, it only just changes in the measurements, the methods we do, nothing else. It's my thought.
In congenital conditions, especially after severe tetralogy with severe RV hypertrophy, sometimes they may have RV diastolic dysfunction. So in that case, if the right atrial kick might actually cause the forward pulmonary flow, which is called as the Lichtenberg phenomenon. That is, if the RV compliance is too reduced, the right atrial kick actually will open the pulmonary valve and there will be forward flow. So the right atrial kick definitely will contribute to the right ventricular filling, but to a certain extent, that once the compliance is grossly reduced, the right atrial kick actually may not improve the RV function. That is what I know in congenitals. Sometimes we can see, rarely in with severe hypertrophy of the right ventricle. Then can we take some more questions? Sir, Murli sir, we have some more time.
I think we can go up to 8:45. So another 5-10 minutes you can spend, because
yes, some more questions are there.
Up to 8:45
how to differentiate between the reverberation of? Okay, sir. How to differentiate between the reverberation of VSD patch and the residual VSD? This is from Dr. Vivek. How to differentiate between the reverberation of VSD patch and residual VSD?
Well, no, I don't deal with this exactly, so I'll be happy if some cardiac anesthetists can take this. Otherwise, VSD patch again is a patch on the septum, and therefore all its movements will be aligned with the movements of the septum. And if you put an echo across the septal movement and the movement of the VSD patch will appear to be identical. While in the VSD per se, there will be a clean dropout.
Yeah, basically on echocardiography, reverberation is an artifact. So what you see is when the VSD patch is there, you see the reverberation artifact. But in the residual VSD, the color Doppler will show definitely color the flow across the VSD from LV to RV side. So probably these two should not be confusing, because the reverberation artifact of the VSD will tell you about the location of the VSD. Yeah, so basically residual VSD can be identified by. Yeah, Dr. Hema, please.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what I was going to say. The patch will be hyperechogenic. VSD will be a dropout. Yeah. And also sometimes you do see the reverberation, but what you, if it is a VSD, you can look at it in the different views. You can look at it in the 4-chamber. Then you can also look at it in the aortic short axis view, where the perimembranous or the outlet VSD are in 2 different places. And then also you can look at it in the deep transgastric long axis view of the ventricle. So if you look at it in 3 different views, even if there are any residual doubts, that should clear it up for you between a residual VSD and a patch which is moving too much. But either way, I think echogenically, they both are very different. Often they use a Gore-Tex patch, and that is a highly echogenic straight line. So we haven't actually encountered confusion in that area. So that's been my experience.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Hema. One more question is from Dr. Deva Pratap. He has asked the interatrial septum dropout during thoracic echo. Is there any way to rule out ASD without transesophageal echo? If there is a dropout of interatrial septum during the thoracic echo, is there any way to rule out the ASD without transesophageal echo?
I suppose you could try Valsalva. No, transthoracic may be an unintubated patient. I don't know. I cannot comment on that.
Also, one simple thing we use in ICU for such patients is we give them a bubble contrast.
Yeah, I was thinking of the same thing. Bubble contrast with.
When we have unexplained hypoxia, say if it's ARDS, fully developed ARDS, so we do expect some PFOs to open up. And the other common setting is when we have cirrhotics with pulmonary hypertension, unexplained hypoxia, you are increasing or decreasing the FiO2, and then you give the contrast and check for an extra cardiac shunt, and you will find that there's hepatopulmonary syndrome. So agitated saline at the bedside is the simplest and the safest way to do it.
Hepatopulmonary syndrome is the easiest to diagnose with this agitated saline technique. It is easiest to diagnose in cirrhotic.
Yeah, usually along with the Valsalva, that is, if you inflate the patient on, if you give Valsalva maneuver and inject the agitated saline, if you can detect the bubbles in the LA within first 3 cardiac cycles, 3 to 5 cardiac cycles, it is suggestive of the intraatrial shunt, maybe ASD or PFO. If it takes 5 to 10 seconds, it may be because of the AV fistulas. Also,
yeah,
so there are possibilities. But usually within 3 to 5 cycles, if you are getting the bubbles in the LA with the Valsalva maneuver, that is more or less suggestive of the intraatrial shunt, which we can reverse with the Valsalva. There is one more question from Dr. Girish Manjunath. Which is the best and easiest parameter to quantify MR? Which is the easiest and reliable parameter to quantify MR? But he has not specified whether it is in adults, pediatrics, and in which conditions, rheumatic or ischemic. MR may be of different etiology.
It's a tricky question. Yeah, basically, it's a very tricky question.
Presume it is an adult patient.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Presume that it's an adult patient. So basically, it's a very broad question. So we have to see first whether this is a multiple jets or a single jet or eccentric jet, because whatever the methods we have in our hand, all cannot be applied for all. Like this, if there is multiple MR jet, you can't use the vena contracta. And if there are regurgitation in any of the valves like AR or PR, you can't use the quantification method. So best method any day is EROA. That is the most robust method. And if you ask me the best method, which is 3D EROA, which can also be used for multiple jets. But for other methods, for PISA, definitely for eccentric jet, eccentric jet, the European Society have raised questions whether PISA is a good method for eccentric jet. So there is a query. It's good for the central jet. Again, for vena contracta, you can use for central jet, maybe for eccentric jet, but not for multiple jets. And whether the MR is holodiastolic or non-continuous, that also has to be seen. So it's not an easy question. So you have to assess the MR and the central MR, eccentric MR, and then you have to see whether this is a multiple jet or not, whether this is holosystolic or not, and then only you plan your method of choice.
We'll be addressing MR in the mitral valve section.
Tomorrow we'll be coming to that. But there's one question on COVID patients with RV dysfunction. Can we use vasodilators? I think this is referring to Dr. Arup Ratan.
What's the question, sir? Can you please repeat again?
It is about experience with pulmonary vasodilators in COVID patients with RV dysfunction. Pulmonary vasodilators in COVID patients with RV dysfunction. Do you have any experience?
I don't have any.
Let me take that question.
Yes, please.
Yeah. See, RV dysfunction can happen because of the severe ARDS in these patients. Also, certain degree of myocardial ischemia and microvascular coagulation problems and thrombi can happen and can also worsen it. So RV dysfunction is a known phenomena in these people. Pulmonary vasodilators as inhaled, say, milrinone or prostacyclins have been used. Inhaled nitric oxide also has been used. But again, it is anecdotal. There is no real extensive. These situations can be a problem in the COVID wards.
Thank you, Yatin. Thank you.
Coming to the previous question about MR, at present, the best parameter that we have to assess the MR is the 3D vena contracta, which is supposed to be the best method against which all other methods are compared. So 3D vena contracta we can get directly in the in-fast view, and we can get, as Dr. Arup has mentioned, we can measure the regurgitation orifice area. That will be at present the most reliable parameter that we have in the intraoperative period. Since patients cannot go for MRI or any other radiological methods, in the intraoperative period, the best parameter that we have is a 3D vena contracta area, regurgitation orifice area. Any other questions? Lots of other comments are there, but questions
I think there are lots of questions, and we can request Dr. Murli to send the questions to the presenters directly by email, and they can reply by email. If Dr. Murli, I can make a request to him and the organizing software company, Medinit people, they can accumulate the questions and put the email address of the person who is asking the question, and the presenter can directly respond by email to them.
Absolutely. I will agree to that only because I cannot say no to you. Thank you very much. I will do that. And I think it is time to close. So our virtual dinner is ready.
Sir, Dr. Rajesh wanted to speak about the Echo library. Just
not today.
That is not today.
Not today.
That is on
Okay.
25th.
Okay.
It is already allocated. Time is allocated for that.
Okay,
I think
sir.
our
All right.
virtual dinner is getting ready, and it will get cold if you delay further.
So can I just say thanks to Vaishali and Sushmit, who was our student. He has grown up so much. Nice to see you, Sushmit.
Absolutely. They are all doing well. That's why I picked them up.
Arup Ratan and
that's why I picked them up. And luckily, Suresh Rao did not say no. And Rajesh also did not say no. I picked them up. And thank you very much for joining us. It was a lovely session. And we have 4 more days of exciting TE sessions. Please join us. Tomorrow, please log in by 5:45. And so that we can start at 6 and then get some more excitement tomorrow. And with permission of the chairpersons, moderators, panelists, can I close this session?
Sir, can you give the statistics of this session?
Yeah.
How many people joined and how it
I don't have any figures. I think
I got the figure from the event, this Medinit people. We had 2197 people who joined our webinar today. 2,190. Now the figure has come double to 2,289 people joined us, and we were around 170 minutes online live with the viewers. And I think this is a big success to the event. More than 2,000 is really a big number, and they're worldwide. And we thank, I think, to the GE people who have sponsored today's program.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
The names, Rajesh, do you have the names of the people who joined?
No, the 2,289. The list
we can
is.
just try to find out where they are from. That will be great for formulating a report.
The software company people are taking control of that, and they are recording all the people who have joined.
Only later we can formulate a report for some journal, okay?
We can do that. We can do that. And Dr. Belani, I would like to thank you for joining us. And all the faculty members, Dr. Yatin Mehta, Srinivas, Dr. Hiremat, Vijay was not there, Hema Nair, and all the others who have joined, and the speakers, Vaishali, Sushmit, Arup Ratan, Jatin, Vivek, all of them have done very well. I'm extremely pleased, and they have not let me down. So I'm grateful to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Great to see all of you all on Zoom,
Thank you,
and
sir.
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.